everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. So today's guest is another return guest. She's been on the podcast so many times now, and since 2020, she's been my co-coach, and unfortunately for her, one of my deepest confidants. She'll love that word. Welcome back to the podcast, Emma Storey Gordon.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be back, and I love this topic, so I'm excited.
This is a good topic, and I think a lot of people are going to be excited to listen to this. So, okay, let's just start here. I've already mentioned that you're my peer, my co-coach, my business partner, and my friend. But do you want to introduce yourself? And for anyone who hasn't listened to one of our 390-something podcasts before, do you want to talk about who you are and what you do?
Yes, so I'm Emma. Obviously, my biggest claim to fame is working with Chloe, which I say in jest, but I love the relationship that we have. And I love that everyone's always like, don't work with your friends, don't work with your business partner, or like, don't make your business partner your friend. But I actually think we did it the right way around.
We did, yeah.
Like, we weren't really that close.
No, not at all. I just really respected what you did. We definitely weren't friends. And now I like call Emma up every time I have a fight with James, like, so I'm going to have to get a divorce. And Emma's like, calm down.
And I will say you give the best advice, so.
I know, but isn't it funny that I don't take my own advice? Always the way. But actually, you know what? Fucking vice versa.
Emma, 100%.
Gives the best advice. Lives on the edge of good advice.
Anyway, moving on. My professional life. I am first and foremost a coach, but my biggest coaching value or business value has always been impact, which is why we do the EC method the way that we do it, so we can coach so many people as opposed to one-to-one coaching where you're always going to be limited with the number of people that you can work with. But that also led me to EIQ Nutrition, which is the education course that I run with Amelia, who I know has also been on the podcast.
She's great, and she's sexy.
She is a very sexy lady. She's my second sexiest business partner.
Very well done. Very well done.
I mean, you guys can tie on that, but that also meant that we could impact more coaches in the way that they coach clients. And then on top of that, I run a business mentorship called AF Mentors, which helps coaches basically help more people.
It's kind of like a pyramid scheme. It's self-created.
Where the whole pyramid is me.
Emma.
Next level. Oh, it's me again. Do you know what is interesting? Because of the way we can see things on email marketing software, right? I can see that the same.
Like anyone,
you've
anyone
never
who's coached us is like, Chloe does not look at that.
True.
Yeah.
But anyway, I can see that people have done the EC methods, EIQ, and AFM. Same people.
Ollie.
That's why it's yeah. Oh no, he's not.
He's not done it. Oh, no.
No.
I haven't done it. I haven't done EIQ, and that is my next go-to because I do actually need to do it. Oh, anyway, right. Okay. Sorry. I was just thinking about all the things I need to do that I have no time to do. Okay. So Emma is here today for an actual topic pod. We're not just going to bang on and on and on about the EC method, I promise. I want to talk to you about the menopause, specifically in the context of coaching women going through it and what you have come to know and learn in recent years, because this is now a subject that you specialize in as a coach. So, first question, and I really want you to speak like you're speaking to children. What is the menopause? What exactly happens to a woman's body when it hits, and when does it usually start to happen?
So, good emphasis on usually. And before I start with that, I wanted to emphasize the reason that it's become somewhat of like a speciality for me, because every woman who lives long enough will go through the menopause, and like so many of our clients are perimenopausal or post-menopausal, which means we need to know about this stuff. We need to be good at it. And anyone that coaches women, like, I think it's sometimes seen as a bit of a niche topic. I'm like, it's not niche. If you coach women, you 100% need to know about this. You need to know how to support your clients. So it's such an important topic. The menopause is, as a definition, the time of life when a woman's ovaries stop producing hormones and you stop producing an egg, and thus your menstrual cycle stops. So that is like the menopause. But perimenopause before that is when your cycle becomes irregular, and that's when you tend to experience the most symptoms and most people struggle the most. And then postmenopause is basically the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And a lot of people still get symptoms in post-menopause, but nowhere near as bad usually as perimenopause. Actually, we didn't touch on when this can happen. So usually it's between 45 and 52, I think is the average.
Yeah.
However, it can happen earlier. And then we've also had clients that have been pushed through the menopause, potentially because of things like cancer treatment.
Yeah.
So it's not like it only happens at a certain time of life.
And IVF as well sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. Any sort of like reason for that to occur earlier. And that actually becomes even more important because you're spending a longer period of time post-menopausal. And depending on the reason why you've gone through the menopause early, or even if you've not gone through the menopause early, you may or may not want to replace some of those hormones, for example, due to cancer risk, which means that you need to focus on diet and exercise even more because you're at this higher risk of loss of bone mineral density, loss of muscle mass, increased risk of cardiovascular disease. So you need to be even more aware of the lifestyle modifications that you can make when you can't replace those hormones.
Can you talk me through the three, and we are going to touch on everything you've just talked about. So yeah, don't be like, oh God, I don't want to forget that. Trust me, I got you covered.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about the three different stages of the menopause and the symptoms you can expect to see usually in these stages.
The reason that you keep saying usually as well is that every woman is completely different. Yeah. And as coaches, it's really our job to be aware of the symptoms, to look out for them and to help people find ways to manage them and solutions for them, as opposed to almost like treat every menopausal, you're menopausal, so you should train like this.
Yeah.
We've had clients that actually breeze through the menopause. They just don't shout very loudly because they might sound like a bit of a knob because some people really struggle with that.
Yeah, it's like that with pregnancy and childbirth too. So
exactly.
You get so much more, I don't know. I don't know. You get such a hard time of it if you're like, oh, I actually had a really good experience. You're like, it's not the same for everyone. So we know that's why it's my experience.
Yeah, exactly. It's why it's your experience. But I also think that's really important to talk about as well.
Yeah, especially with women now and on our bodies. It's so, I really struggle with it on social media. It's so hard to say that something, you had a positive experience, because you know that so many people are going to be like, you entitled little... And it's like, that's just me. I've also had some really shit experiences, by the way. And some of those I don't talk about. And, you know, you don't need to share every bad experience that happens to you, basically to virtue signal. It's become a really odd, I guess, a unique selling point for people on Instagram is what awful experiences they do or don't share.
Yeah, and I think with menopause now, it's so good that it's being spoken about more. But it's usually spoken about by people who have had really poor experiences, which I completely understand. But it's making a lot of women quite scared. You know, our kind of age group of being like, yeah, you know, this is going to happen to us at some point. Scared of going through the menopause because of like what they hear. Because obviously there's no news headline being like, women goes through menopause and it's not that bad. Like, but when you hear you know, women had to quit her job because she had all these mental health problems going through the menopause and she struggled so much with symptoms, and that's what you hear. And then you think, oh my God, that's going to be an awful thing. So I think just to balance it, like there are women who you actually don't need to make much changes for and have quite an easy ride of it. And then there are people who really struggle. Yeah. And then there are people who struggle for 5 years, people who struggle for 6-month period, people who, you know, so there's everything in between, and some people get some symptoms and other people get other symptoms. And the kind of annoying thing about estrogen is that there's estrogen receptors all over your body, which is why the symptoms can occur all over your body. And it is, especially for us to be aware of as coaches, it's a time where if you've previously had troubles with food or troubles with mental health, like it's much more likely to come back during that time because of all these hormonal fluctuations that can occur. So in terms of like the most common like generic symptoms of menopause that most people would go to their doctors with, it's usually things like hot flushes because they're very noticeable. Flash. Well, if you're in America, flash. But then I'm like,
yeah, of course.
But we're flush, right?
Yeah, flash.
Yeah. So things like that, like reduced mood, kind of normal PMS symptoms, but times 100, and you don't know when they're going to come. And I think that's the other kind of... Am I going through the menopause? Yeah, like the other kind of like unnerving thing is when you know that you're going to have PMS symptoms at, oh, do you know what? It's probably the week before my period. Oh, wait, yeah, look,
and then you can't distinguish what's going on. And obviously it's all real. So saying the sentence is a bit, people will be like, it's real because, when men are like, you're on your period. It's all real, but you can't distinguish what is a result of an hormonal fluctuation and what is actually how you really genuinely feel in that moment. That I would really struggle with.
Yeah. And things that reduce sex drive, vaginal dryness, all these things have a really big impact on people's lives that a lot of people don't speak about, and it can break down marriages. If the communication's not there, it's not that I don't find you attractive anymore, I've fallen out in love with you. It's just that these changes are happening within my body, and it's much easier to talk about if you know about it. I was looking up some stats yesterday actually, and 77% of women didn't know that they were going through the menopause. And if you can imagine how scary. I don't know if that's a
good thing or a bad thing. Is it
bad,
is it because half of me is is it because your symptoms were okay?
Yeah.
Or is it because you didn't know enough and then you must have felt so lost enduring that time period?
And I think it's, actually, hopefully it's a bit of both, but I think when it's the latter, it becomes a problem because you're like, why am I struggling so much with diet and exercise? Why am I, so moody all the time? Why do I not have any motivation for anything? Why is my sex drive gone? Why am I really hot at certain times? Is there something fundamentally wrong with me? And a lot of women think that they're going mad or they're depressed because they don't know the symptoms.
They don't know what they're going through. Can I just say also, all the symptoms of menopause are breastfeeding postnatal symptoms. So the hot flashes, the night sweats, the brain fog, I couldn't speak. I've only recently in the last few weeks, it's been so written, obviously, as soon as I came away from breastfeeding, because your estrogen is so repressed when you do it. And I honestly, also sometimes the nausea, the mood swings, the no libido. And I was like, wow, so I'm gonna have to do all this all over again. Not only if I want to have another baby, but later in life. Women and men just, they get the menopause, their testosterone decreases, and a lot of men actually do really struggle with their mental health as a result of that, and their physical health, of course. But we really have to do it over and over and over and over again. We really do.
And I don't think obviously the reduction in testosterone that men experience is impactful, but I don't think it's comparable.
One thing that a lot of our clients and a lot of women, and especially in what we do, because we do like it or lump it, have a lot of clients who have physique goals, who care about their physique, their appearance, their aesthetics. So one thing that we get a lot is belly fat, increased stored fat around the middle as a symptom, a sign and symptom of the menopause. And I also think specifically menopausal women generally. So can you talk to me about why this happens and if... you're going to hate this question, but whatever, I'm doing it anyway.
I know you can't spot reduced body fat.
But can you spot reduce the belly fat that I gained in the menopause that now won't shift? So can you talk about why that happens and how you as a coach tackle that? Because like I say, for a lot of our clients, that's top of the pile.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the reason it happens is the reduction in estrogen, and it kind of changes the way that women store body fat from more the traditional female pear shape to more like the apple shape, which is traditionally a more male way of storing body fat. Mm-hmm. But because of this change in sex hormones, you're more likely to store more fat around your middle. Now, not only do some people just not like that and feel uncomfortable, but it also increases your risk of cardiometabolic complications. So storing fat on your arms and legs peripherally is a pretty safe place to store fat. Then when it becomes around your middle, that's actually not such a safe place to store fat. So not only from an aesthetic point of view, but from a health point of view, you want to minimize the amount of fat you store there. Mm-hmm. The only real way to, I guess, you could say spot reduce that would be to take HRT, as in to choose where fat would come from. Mm-hmm. It's much less likely to be distributed in that way if you're taking HRT. But other ways are just normal dieting, right? But it's not going to come preferentially from your middle.
And I think that's something that we're at pains often to explain to clients, is that it's not that we're going to come on to this, the difficulty with diet and exercise, some of the signs and symptoms, meaning that actually you do now gain body fat, not because as a direct result of the fact you're going through the menopause, but actually it's kind of like a domino effect of all the symptoms that come with going through the menopause that then can lead you, much like if you take the pill and you find that you gain loads of weight, which then can lead you to gain weight. So we are going to come on to that, but we are at pains to explain to clients, it's not so much that you're going through the menopause, so now, you have more belly fat. It's like we said, it's a difference in where you store it, and we can still tackle it. And we'll come on to HRT in a minute. We can still tackle it, but it's not, this is the way that your body is now going to have to look for the next 10 years of your life. There's a lot we can do.
And I think that's not helped by the fact that weight gain is listed as a side effect of menopause. So the way that that's worded, and the thing is, it's true. Often people gain weight as they go through menopause, much like you said, partly because of like even things like lack of sleep, like hot flushes at night.
This is what I wanted to ask you. So can you talk to me about why women find that they gain weight, not just around their belly, but as a whole when they're going through the menopause? What happens?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's kind of two distinct aspects of this. What does happen, and this is where people think like it's out with their control. During menopause or with reduction in estrogen, there is a slight reduction in basal metabolic rate. Now,
like, do you have any?
Yeah, we're talking about like, I would say max 50 calories, like in that kind of ballpark, right? It's certainly not why you're like, oh, I'm not losing weight
on 1,000 calories.
Yeah, like it's not stopping you lose weight. I just like to point that out because a lot of people hear that
come back to
and
you.
then, think that that's why they're not losing weight. But it's really important with all of these things generally in health and fitness. What is the magnitude of effect here, right? Mm-hmm. That's really important to know. So there's that tiny element. And then there's the way bigger impact, which is what you're saying about all of the symptoms. So things like reduced mood, things like reduced sleep. It's way harder to stick to a diet. You might have more cravings. Like imagine the cravings that you had before your period. Now you have them, the majority of the time. Yeah. Of course, it's harder to stick to a diet. Mm-hmm. The other thing is it happens at a time of life where a lot of women are top of their career, so high stress. Yeah. Their parents are aging, so they're often looking after their parents. And then they also have kids that are still at home. So you've got so much stress on you, plus now you've got all these symptoms to do with your own health. And that in itself can just be like a really hard time, which
overwhelming.
Means, that's where it's really useful to have some kind of support. And that's kind of where we come in as coaches, but also dealing with how do we find solutions to some of the problems that you're having. So another thing that we often do with menopausal clients is have them do slightly shorter, more frequent workouts, partly due to fatigue, partly due to the fact that lower levels of estrogen impact your ability to recover from resistance training or any exercise. Yeah. Which means that whenever you're doing training, you don't want to do so much training that you can't recover from it. Yeah. Right? That's coming into like an overtraining phase. So you want to make sure that you can still recover from the exercise that you do and that it's giving you energy, not taking away energy. So you'll know this from after having Bodhi, right? If you're not sleeping well, you will get energy from doing a 20-minute workout. Yeah. You will get more fatigue from doing a 1 hour workout. Yeah. So it's like the dose is more important. Yeah. And that's tweaked to every individual client because...
And we do this with chronic fatigue clients as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
Little and often, and let's monitor. Always like 2 days between workouts at sea. Mm-hmm. We go from there. And you can, more often than not, progress over time because of the adaptation that occurs as a result. But yeah, I love that point. Carry on, Emma.
Yeah. And I think another point on diet and exercise and why I'm so passionate about it around menopause is that there's a quote I love from a research review that looked at all menopause treatments, and it said something along the lines of, I don't actually have it written down, that diet and exercise is the only non-controversial treatment for menopause and should be adopted by everybody, right? Yeah. So even if you can't take HRT, if you can, that's more of a discussion for your doctor. But when it comes to diet and exercise, everybody needs to do it. Saying that, I'm fully aware, we're fully aware as coaches, this is also probably not only the most important, but hardest time of your life to diet and exercise, right? Yeah. When you're tired, when your mood's lower, when your body's changing, when, all of these things that are kind of stacking up against you. And maybe, you used to love spin, but now you keep getting hot flushes or you've got vaginal dryness. So sitting on a spin bike's not right for you. And
get that breastfeeding as well. This cystitis is real.
Yeah, exactly. Like all these things. So it's about figuring out what's going to work for that client. Yeah. And then also when you're going from a point of, right, I've got all these symptoms and I feel shit, the last thing I want to do is focus on diet and exercise. We need to break that down because actually the only way you're going to feel better is to start dieting and exercising. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that you can go straight into
Minimal effective dose.
Minimal effective dose, but not looking back at what you used to do and be like, well, I used to do 5 workouts a week, so I'll just do that. No, like let's just start. And the whole reason that you start small is that if you start just going out for a walk, you notice your mood increase just a little bit.
Yeah.
Then you get like half a workout in, your mood increases a little bit more. Then you start making better food choices because your mood's better. And it like all kind of like stems from that. Then you've started taking action, which means that actually motivation always follows action. Most people think that you get motivated and then you take action, but it's usually the other way around.
Yeah.
And then actually the ball starts rolling and it becomes easier and easier. But what usually happens is this all or nothing of like, I can't do a 40-minute spin session, so I'm not doing anything. Yeah. But can we just go for a 10-minute walk?
Yeah. What can you do? Keep saying it. It's in so many podcasts now. What can I do? What can I do? That is how you make progress always. Even if it feels like yesterday you were doing a massive lifting session, today you can't do that. You can only walk. This is how big picture, long term in the span of your life, this is how you continue to progress. When you view it as just like a cute switch or step back and then you do nothing, that's when we lose you. So I love that. Okay, let's stay on exercise specifically for a moment. I know and you know, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners know, really when it comes to menopausal women, we really encourage weightlifting, resistance training. Do you want to talk about why that is?
Yeah. So after menopause especially, but actually as anybody ages, you're more likely to lose muscle mass, which we know is massively important for health, both metabolic health, healthy aging, disease risk, and also just like quality of life as you age. Like how long do you want to be independent? The other really scary stats are around like if you break a bone, I guess that's more related to bone mineral density, which is also impacted by aging and post-menopause and helped by resistance training. If you break a bone later on in life, you're very unlikely to recover from it. And
isn't that horrifically terrifying?
Yeah, it's like a lot of older people die from like hip fractures that they just never recover from.
So they say like if you have any, like not, this is really specific, but like if you've got some hip issues earlier on, do the replacement earlier on so that when you're older, that's not the thing that gets you.
Resistance training will mitigate some of the loss of bone mineral density and muscle mass that you experience as you age. So will HRT, but whether you're taking that or not, it's still very important to be resistance training. I mean, at any age. Yeah. And I think a lot of the trends of this, whenever we speak about menopause, it's like all this stuff was important.
Always.
And now it's more important.
Now it's more important. That's it. You're right. And this is something that we do come up with a lot. Like, it's like all the rules are exactly the same. It's just probably harder for you now because of these signs and symptoms and hormonal fluctuations. And it's more important to you now because of these things that are happening to your body. But actually, when you come down to the bare bones of it, it's the exact same thing that we would tell everybody to do, whether they were 16 or 76. So we talk about resistance training. We talk about osteoporosis, sarcopenia. We talk about how you like clients to approach their diet specifically in the context of not losing muscle mass as they go through the menopause. And then after that, we can come on to how you try to coach clients to approach the difficulty sticking to a diet now they're going through the menopause. How do you coach for these things?
So in some ways, not that different than anybody else, but like protein's even more important because you're at this heightened risk of muscle mass loss. Another really interesting piece of research was looking at the quality of your diet and the amount of or the severity of symptoms that you had. And it was really looking primarily at hot flushes because I think that's quite an easy thing to measure, like how many are you having, how bad were they, and you can sort of mark that off. Yeah. So they looked at that in comparison to the amount of processed food that you're eating.
Sorry, I'm just getting comfortable. Just getting super comfy.
And what they showed was that people who ate more processed food had worse symptoms, so worse hot flushes, and people who ate less had less hot flushes. So the quality of your diet is probably very important.
And what do you have an idea as to why that is? Did they suggest as to why that is?
I think various things. So it could be things like general health, maybe inflammation, potentially weight. so if you're eating more processed food, you might be
carry more weight,
carry more weight.
More insulation.
Yeah. And then also things like, people who are overweight are more likely to go through the menopause earlier and actually have a worse time of it than people who are living a healthy lifestyle.
Why is that? Just because of the impact on hormonal health, hormonal function? Is that it?
It seems to be that.
There's no conclusive, this is why.
Often it comes back to inflammation, and sometimes I think in the research there's a little bit of a cop-out. Like everything comes back to like levels of inflammatory markers. But and I think that seems to be the way. And things like smoking as well increase, or you're more likely to go through menopause earlier. It is also just generally like an impact of like a healthy lifestyle, like people as well.
Healthier. Like, it's that simple.
If you're doing, like I said, the best thing you could do for symptoms is diet and exercise, like a healthy life, or they call it lifestyle modification, right? Which is what they mean. The interesting thing about that study is that it was observational. So you could also, as I was reading it, I was like, are they eating more processed food? So within that would be things like chocolate, like quote unquote junk food, comfort food, that kind of thing. Are they eating more of that because they need to have more comfort in because their symptoms are worse? Mm-hmm. Or are their symptoms worse because they're eating more of that? And because it's observational,
you don't know.
You can't say either way.
I still guess it would be the former though. I mean, sleep deprivation is real.
Yeah.
That'll get you.
It's potentially a bit of a combination of the two.
Absolutely, yeah.
The other really interesting study on, this is more to do with HRT, and I know we're going to come on to it, but just because it's top of my head, but it partly relates to why it's so important to explain like why these things might be beneficial. So this study looked at the impacts of HRT on symptoms. And now obviously you know this, but in randomized controlled trials, they'll have an arm where someone's not getting the treatment, but they think that they are, right? So you're seeing how much of an effect a placebo can have. The placebo treatment arm reduced symptoms by 50%.
I mean, that doesn't surprise me.
But it's mad,
it's utterly mental, but every placebo statistic I read blows my
every time I'm
mind.
Like, how?
It's real. I had this conversation with James. I can't remember what he was saying. He was talking about he was taking some supplement that I'd never even heard of for something. And I just kind of like smirked because I'm such a twat. And he was like, look, I don't know if there's any evidence behind it. And I was like, the only evidence you need is whether or not you think it works, because the placebo effect is real, and that's all. Like, we don't care if it makes you feel like, I don't know, you're the cannabis oil, cannabinoid oil.
CBD oil.
Yeah, thank you. CBD. I can say cannabinoid, but not CBD.
Oh no, the cannabinoid system.
Cannabinoid, your cannabinoid endocrine system. There's really not that much data behind it to say that it works. Well, there's not. But so many people anecdotally are like, no, it really, really works for me. It really helped me manage my anxiety. I really started to sleep better at night. And, who knows exactly what it is. But what we do know is the placebo effect is a very, very powerful thing. So carry on.
Even if you think you're getting HRT, you see this big reduction in symptoms. And that's why we're quite open to people being like, hey, I'm taking ashwagandha and it seems to be helping. It's like, okay, great, keep taking it. The only time I don't like placebo is when people are being kind of sold a lie. Like if they're spending, and some CBD products are really expensive.
Of course.
And if they're spending, hundreds of pounds a month on CBD, saying that, what's hard is that more expensive placebos work better, and we have research to show that as well.
Well, exactly. So that's why I have no judgment. I'm like, whatever you need to do, babe, you do it. Whatever makes you happy. Like I told you about that really funny story I heard about the girl who was like, every time I take my creatine before I bench press, I bench heavier. And her coach was like, why am I fighting this? And he was like, great, do it. Like, we know that it doesn't have an acute impact on the body, but she thought it did. And that's all that matters. Like,
and the thing is, it does if you think it does.
It does if you think it does, exactly.
It's so hard to explain the placebo because you're like, well, we know it doesn't have that impact, but it does.
But it does if you think it does.
Yeah,
it's true.
Because the body's freaking mad.
Amazing.
Like that.
So let's say, for me, and in the EC method, we basically have like minimum protein targets for our male and female clients. If I have people who want to get really specific about it for specific reasons and good reasons, I will say 2 grams per kg of lean mass. Would you? Let's just say if you did have someone who wanted to get specific for it, with it, would you increase that?
I think that's still a good level.
You think that's still a good level?
And I think most women won't be hitting anywhere near that.
No, I
There's
agree.
also some evidence that a bit more creatine is beneficial as well. And then I guess the other thing to touch on is phytoestrogens. So like foods that have high phytoestrogens in them. which mimic estrogen to an extent.
So like soya-based products. What else is there?
There's a lot of like fruits that are fruit and veg that's higher.
Well, you know what? I want to stop here because let's move on to HRT.
Oh, okay.
Talk about HRT. I want to know who's viable and why, who isn't and why. Same. What are the varying forms of HRT out there? What does the data show on its impact on symptoms of menopause?
It is the most common treatment for menopause, and some people are like, it completely changed my life. Like I thought I was going crazy, or I thought, it has had such a huge impact on me. And other people can't take it for various reasons, usually to do with cancer risk. Some people just don't want to take it. With those people, I'm always quite like, obviously it's, this one isn't a discussion with your coach. It's a discussion with your doctor,
We are not
right?
doctors.
Because there's numerous reasons that people shouldn't take HRT.
Yeah.
And it is a discussion that you should have with your doctor if it's right for you and the pros and cons to that. I think what's kind of happened is there's been this shift because there was a study that was released that showed a slight increase in breast cancer risk. When it was kind of like broken down and analysed properly, that risk actually wasn't as high as what people thought it was. Now, as an example of this, your increased risk of breast cancer from being overweight is far higher than the increased risk from HRT.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Caveat to that, unless potentially you have estrogen receptor positive breast cancer, right?
So this is something really interesting. So I had Zoe Hardman on the podcast. Her mum had an estrogen-fed tumour, basically.
Right.
And was on HRT for menopause, came off. And Zoe's doctor has left her on it for the time being, but is monitoring her. Now, I find that quite surprising. Is that common? I mean, I was like, oh, I would have thought they would have pulled you off.
I don't know how, just because it depends how genetic that form of breast cancer is. Because just because her mum had it doesn't mean
that she's going to get it.
She's going to get it.
Okay, so carry on.
But that's a really good point because you're looking at the cost versus the risk, right?
Yeah.
So say you're like, I'm not going to take HRT, but actually by not taking HRT, your symptoms for menopause are so bad that you're not exercising, you're overweight, you're overeating. Your quality of life is
awful.
And if actually taking HRT can mean that you start modifying your behaviours and having a healthier lifestyle, that's going to reduce your risk of breast cancer. Like even if we're just looking at breast cancer, that's going to reduce your risk of breast cancer more than the potential of the increased risk with taking HRT.
Yeah.
The other thing it reduces risk of are things like osteoporosis, sarcopenia, cardiovascular disease. So you have to weigh the pros and cons. I think sometimes we only see one side of the argument of, oh, there was this study that's now been debunked that showed increased risk of breast cancer. And I think the same narrative happened with the vaccine of, if I don't do anything, there's less risk to it. So it's like, taking this might increase my risk of something, so I'm not going to take it. And you don't look at the risk of not taking it, like the risk of inaction, basically.
Yeah.
But to caveat all of that, like, if you're hearing this from me, go and speak to a doctor. Like,
100%.
That's always, and we're always saying this on the EC method, like, we'll talk about these things and it's good to be aware of symptoms, but what we really want for clients is to self-advocate at their doctors, like, hey, I've heard this.
Yeah.
I'm worried about breast cancer risk. Can you tell me what my personal risk would be based on my personal medical background?
Yeah.
What do you think the best situation for me would be in this context? It also depends when you start taking HRT as well. If you leave it for a while post-menopause and then start taking it, your risk of breast cancer is increased slightly.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. I do agree with you completely that it's actually quite surprising given how much we talk about it, and we have been talking about it for a while. It's actually quite surprising how many women are like, no, I haven't gone to my doctor and inquired about HRT. Do you think I should? Yes is the answer. Absolutely. And yeah, look, Emma and I are not doctors, and I say this in almost every podcast. Please, just hear what we're saying, and if you want to inquire deeper, find the right professional for that inquiry. Okay, what about women who can't take HRT? And this is what you started to touch on. I was like, stop, because I'm obsessed with my linear list of questions. Is there any evidence behind any supplements out there that can help, or any dietary choices that can help?
So this also depends on why you're not taking HRT. So if it was for estrogen receptor breast cancer risk, as an example, you actually would probably want to avoid phytoestrogens as well, because that's going to have Like,
same effect. Well,
I
similar.
mean, a minimal effect, but like you would still want to avoid that.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're not taking HRT because you're like, I don't want to put fake hormones in my body, then, I mean, one, I would look up the natural fallacy and kind of like think about that a little bit. Yeah. But it's completely your choice, right? So if you're like, I'd rather not do that, fine. That's an empowered choice that you're making, as long as it's an educated one and you're getting the right information.
Yeah.
Then you might want to look at foods that are high in phytoestrogens. In terms of supplements, like there's no like strong evidence, but back to our point about placebo.
Yeah.
You know, if you're taking, I don't know, ZMA and you're finding that it helps me sleep, freaking great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
take it.
Yeah. So there's nothing that I'd be like, yes, you have to take this. Maybe creatine.
Yeah, creatine. And as you're talking about, you know, protein powder is just but if it counts as a supplement, that's a great way to get your leucine in, spike your muscle protein synthesis, and protect muscle against wastage. Okay, I think a lot of women do view going through the menopause almost as like a death sentence, and I think part of that's just to do with acceptance of aging and grieving. You know, I guess what they view is now behind them, although I know a lot of women who've gone through the menopause, both, you know, the early menopause and older, who have never looked better, literally never looked better. So if anyone out there is listening, like, oh my gosh, this was me. I've seen it with my own two eyes. You don't have to view it like that at all. I think a lot of women are really overwhelmed and a bit broken by it. Can you please explain, Emma, having sat and watched this unfold, what we and you specifically have managed to achieve with our menopausal clients, and please bleed some light into the hopelessness that so many women feel at this time?
Okay, well, if I forget to come back to this, remind me to mention Janine.
Oh, amazing,
right? And just beautifully kind of shows articulated the response that we want people to, and the empowerment that we want people to have towards this. But a really interesting point that you touched on there about like people's perception of aging. And the research around this is crazy. Kind of comes back to like placebo and expectation effect as well, that if you think that aging is a negative thing, it is. Yeah. Right. And if you don't think it is, then often it's not, or it doesn't affect you in the same way. And I think so much of our media, we were just talking about this with menopause, like you only really see the negatives. That's what's being shouted about, or like aging is a negative thing, or look how old this person looks now, and oh, she's not aged well, or oh, you know, menopause, and then it's all downhill from there. And it, like, if you think all of those things, like that will come to it will come to fruition. Whereas if you're like, actually, what a privilege to age, and how incredible that my body still works in certain ways, and actually how cool is my life, and I've got so much more left to live, and these experiences that I still want to have, and I get to see my kids, my grandkids, whatever, or your friends' grandkids. You know, it doesn't even have to be your own. There's still so much life left to give. Yeah. And then I think there's a really cool study on like perception of aging, where they put everybody in like a house that's basically 50 years ago, right? To like the radio would be like what it would look like then. Like they had newspapers of 50 years ago. Yeah. And I can't remember the exact age of these people, but let's say they were like between 70 and 80. They were put into this house where they would be like 30, 40. Yeah. And they take photos of them before they go in, and then after living in this house for a week, as they would have at that age, they take photos of them again, and they show people these photos, and they ask them to judge, like, and they don't show them together, but they ask them just to like, okay, this is a person, how old do you think them to be? Yeah, how old do you think they are? And they guess something like 10 to 20 years younger. Stop. Yeah. Oh, from my 1 week of living like they used to live. And you just think, what an impact it can have on your expectation. You even see things like this with the same cancer diagnosis, but people who have a positive outlook, and they're like, no, I'm gonna live longer than that, or I'm gonna beat that. Oh, I've seen it. I've seen people be given 6 weeks to live, and 6 years later they're still there, and I'm like, and they have nothing but positive energy around the whole thing. It's incredible. Even like going through the treatment, but very actively and consciously saying, okay, now I'm doing everything I can do. So now I'm going to go into a period of denial of like, this isn't happening to me. I'm going to carry on living my life. Again, caveat to this, once they're already doing what they should be doing, and the impact that can have. Yeah. Oh my God, it's phenomenal.
There's a really interesting podcast on it. It's The Moth. Have you ever heard of The Moth? It's like these people, they get up and they tell life stories. Oh my God, it's one of the best podcasts in the world. And I think it's this New York Times journalist. Don't take me my specific word for this, because I listened to this about 3 years ago now, and he talks about that. And he was basically given like a terminal diagnosis, and they were like, well, "There's no point in doing treatment. Like it's going to ruin your quality of life, and you've only got X amount of time left." And he's like more than quadrupled that amount of time, and he's still here, and he credits it to basically going into a state of denial about it and carrying on living his life regardless. And I think I think it's China. Is it China? I can't remember, but there's a country in Asia where they don't typically traditionally tell older people when they're dying. They tell their children, they tell their immediate family. They decide whether or not to tell them. The statistics behind that are phenomenal. So it's really interesting. You talk about the power of the placebo effect, the brain power, what you tell yourself.
Just of expectations of what's going to happen. Yeah.
It's incredible.
So, and I actually, like some of the cancer patients I've worked with that really don't want to talk about it and don't want to be identified as, like, I remember talking to one woman, and I think I'd asked her if I could share something on social media about, like, basically she was like 68 and was doing like 10 push-ups in a row, and she had like better triceps than me. I was like, oh, you're incredible.
That's a big deal, because Emma's triceps are fire.
And she had terminal bowel cancer at the same time. And I was like, oh, this... And she was like, yeah, you can put anything up, just don't mention cancer. And I was like, wow. I mean, the thing is, she's so impressive without that, right? But it makes it even next level impressive.
But you're fine by that. We have a client at the moment who we love, and she's definitely listening, and she knows exactly who she is. And
she doesn't like it as much.
Hates it. Absolutely.
I don't want to be identified as it.
Don't. I don't want to be seen as a victim. I don't feel like a victim. Please do not put me in that bracket. And it's like, fair enough. And we're always at pains to say, like, we don't talk about you because of that. We love your mental attitude. Yeah. And yes, that is.
And she's hilarious.
She's hilarious. She's really fit. She's a massive flirt. She makes everything sexual. But there's so much more to people than the things that they're going through. And there's a reason why I'm not a really big sharer on social media of the hard things that I've gone through or do go through. Probably at a detriment to how likeable I am. But I don't want to share that stuff because I don't want people to look at me and feel sorry for me. And I've always said it, like, I always wonder if I had a diagnosis like that, who would I really tell? I don't know how. I just don't. Fair enough. And I think it can have such a huge impact on your mental health.
Yeah, and then I can also see the other side of, like, how inspiring that is.
Oh, definitely.
To share the story as well. Anyway, back to the point about menopause. Janine, I remember, came on the Easy Method podcast, and the way that she spoke about all of her friends sort of saying, oh, this is menopause.
Just
like,
accept it.
Yeah, that's how your body's going to be now. Like, no point doing anything about it. And she was like,
fuck that.
No, I don't want that. Like, I want to live a long, healthy life. I want to be in shape. She had abs.
No, she didn't have abs. She was fucking shredded. Yeah. I was like, Janine, I think we need to talk about like basically what we're going to do going forward, because you're done. You're done. But it's true. I loved how she talked about it. They were like, just accept it, like self-love, self-love, self-love. And we talk about that a lot of the time in the context of kind of different things away from the menopause, physique stuff.
But self-love is...
Yeah,
like, that is self-love.
And she was like, she really, really resonated with our messaging on that. And she was like, no, I'm not going to lie down and accept this. I'm miserable. Oh, and by the way, her internal health was really starting to suffer. She was like, why the hell am I going to embrace this? Fuck off. And probably one of the most impressive client transformations we've ever had. And she's post-menopausal, in her 50s. And we have so many women being like, I'm in my 50s. Is it too late? No. No,
and that's what's so interesting. Like, when we get those questions, I'm like, I would say I would say at least like half of our clients are perimenopausal.
Oh God, yeah. And it's funny. I was talking to my pelvic floor physio, Jo, who came on. She was like, it's so funny how many women I have who are like have a baby back to back to back to back, come out of it, and then bang, they hit the menopause, and they're like, no, I'm not going through the menopause. I just had a baby. And Jo's like, yep. And here we are. So funny. I just had an Instagram message from someone being like, I thought I was menopausal and then I got pregnant. And that's another important point to make, again, for your doctor. But like, a lot of people think when they're going through the menopause because their cycle isn't consistent that they can't get pregnant. You can. Yeah. And you will. Well, this is, this is again, something with Zoe. She was starting to show signs and symptoms. And if her genetics are anything to go by, she was already perimenopausal, and she got pregnant. And she was told she couldn't have children. And she's another one who kept apologizing. She was like, I'm so sorry. I know there's so many women out there. And I'm like, look, we all have our own experience. It's fine. I absolutely have loved talking to you about this today, Emma. And I'm really sure that we've hopefully shed some light on it, hopefully some positivity on it. We're all women. We're all in it together. And if we're not there yet, we will be soon. And I have absolutely loved talking to you on this. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you. And I will just leave it with, if you feel like menopause is just a downhill thing, or like there's nothing you can do. We get so many women that are going through the menopause and feel like there's nowhere to turn, or there's nothing they can do, or it's an inevitability. It's not. And it does get better. And you do, like, sometimes you do need more support.
Yeah.
I think one thing that's quite common is a lot of women that we get who are like, I've been fine my whole life with my weight. And now I'm really struggling. And I kind of liken it to, this wasn't me, but like the smart kids at school who then got to uni and were like, I don't know how to study because I've always just like passed all my exams, right? And it's kind of similar. It's like, I've never had to look at my diet before.
Yeah.
Because it's always just come as second nature. Now I really need to start looking at these things. So we help a lot of peri and postmenopausal women. So,
and the community, something about the EC method specifically, the fact that we've got so many women on there, like I say, pre and postnatal, peri-menopausal, postmenopausal, you know, in their 20s, in their 50s, in their 60s, like we have got such a huge variation of women, and there's so much support, there's so much love. Everyone's got a different start point, everyone's got a different goal, everyone's in a different phase in their life, and it's just nothing but love and support and humor. And when you're going through something like the menopause, and even postnatally can be a lonely place to be, having that support every day, you might not realize it. You might think, oh, yuck, a Facebook group. No thanks. Honestly, a Facebook group that make you laugh and that are going through it with you, it is invaluable to you staying the course and enjoying the process, which is the biggest thing that we want for our clients, is to enjoy it, because you're living your life right now. So you better get enjoying it. It's been such a pleasure, Emma, as always. And I guess...
Thanks for having me.
I guess you'll come back on the next series. Oh,
I guess, yeah.
We're running out of things to talk about. Guys, if you like this episode of the podcast, or really any episode or all of the podcast...
Or, you know, if you're just bored, like,
if you're just bored,
share it, like
nothing
it,
to do.
Send it to anyone you know that's struggling.
Send the link to anyone you know, like it, subscribe, add a comment, only a nice one. And please tune in again next week when I will have another fantastic guest.